What's up guys, Justin here with the CGEssentials.com, back with another Blender animation tutorial for you. So in today's video we're going to talk about how to add noise to our animation to move some of that kind of random shift to different transitions inside of our scenes. This is going to allow us to make things a little bit more realistic with things that don't necessarily want to have a perfect movement between a couple points. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. So for this scene we're going to use the ninja animation scene that we created earlier this week. And remember, in this scene, what this does is this takes our plate, it lifts it up, kind of moves it back, and then he throws it forward using the rigid body physics. And so notice how when you first do this though, this plate movement is just so uniform, right? It just goes like straight up, and it doesn't really fit with what you might think like telekinesis would do, because you would expect it to move around a little bit inside of the scene, kind of like left and right and up and down, as if something was holding it there but it wasn't 100% steady. So what we want to do is we want to animate this so that this has a little bit of noise to that movement. Alright, so what we want to do is we want to jump over to the animation tab right here. And inside of the animation tab, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to use the toolbars down below in order to adjust the movement inside of our scene. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we don't want to be in the dope sheet, we want to be in the graph editor. So we're going to click the drop down right here and select the option for graph editor. What that's going to do is that's going to pull up an editor where you can see the different transforms that are happening in our scene. So if we open this up right here, notice how we have different lines in here indicating the different movements that we have. So for example, if we look at our Z location, notice how when this moves upward, this shows the movement from the ground up above the ninja. So notice how when I drag this curve right here is indicating the Z location of our plate inside of our scene. So this plate right here, the movement is indicated by this blue bar. And so what we could do is we could take this and kind of move it around. Notice how when we move it around, that's actually going to affect the location of the plate. So this is another way that you can control animations. Well, what we want to do is we want to take the X, Y, and Z locations of this and add a little bit of noise to them. So let's start off by selecting our X location. So that's this bar right here. And so right now nothing is happening with that bar from an X standpoint up until we switch to rigid body physics. Right here it just stays flat. Well, we want to tap the N key over here. When you tap the N key, there's a tab for modifiers. And so under the modifiers tab, there's a drop down where we can select the option for noise. And so when we click on noise, notice what that's going to do is that's going to add a modifier to this that kind of moves it up and down randomly. So now, if we look at this, when we move this, notice how the plate is kind of moving left to right, just like this, right? So if we click play, this has animated this so that it has a movement in here in addition to the larger movement inside of our scene. And we can adjust the strength of this effect over here using the scale and strength. So notice how right now this is just kind of crazily bouncing around in here. That's because there's so much noise in here, and the scale of the noise that's being placed in here makes those movements really close together. Well, we could drag this to the right in order to scale that out, and that's just going to make those noise movements a lot slower in your scene. So now if you click on this, notice how it does have the left to right movements like this, but it's doing it in kind of a more controlled fashion right here. So you can use that to adjust how close together the noise is with the peaks and valleys. You can also adjust how strong the effect is using this strength option right here. So if I take that strength and I make it very small like this, notice how I'm still getting that noise in here, but it's a lot more of a subtle effect, right? And so right now this is only controlling the X location. And so the other thing we want is we want to turn off the noise type when we switch to the rigid body physics, right? So we don't want the noise to happen once he throws the plate because we want the physics engine to take over. So what we can do is we can use the restrict frame range box right here. We can check it, and then we can set this so that the noise stops at a certain frame. We could also use it to start at a certain frame. So in this case, we want that to stop at a frame of 79, like this. So now, if we run this simulation, it's going to play to frame 79, it's got some noise in there, and then the rigid body system takes over after frame 79. And so we want to do the same thing with the Y and the Z movement. So we're going to click on the Y location, and we're just going to add another noise modifier. For this one, we're going to set the scale a lot larger as well, and we're going to bring that strength down to maybe like 0.2, something like that. So then you're going to get a little bit of noise on both the X and the Y axes. So when it's sitting here floating next to him, it kind of moves around a little bit. And then finally, we want to do the same thing, and let's make sure that we restrict that one's frame range right here. And we're going to set the end to be 79 frames on this one. And then for the last one, the Z location, we're going to do the same thing. So we're just going to add a noise modifier, and we'll set the scale to something larger, like this. And if we play it, notice how we're getting a fair amount of up-down in there. I like that it controls the way that your movement happens while the plate's floating around by the character. I think it just looks a little bit more realistic and a little more fun. And so then we're just going to do the same thing again, where we're just going to restrict our frame range, take it to 79, and then we can jump back into layout mode and look at our result. So now if we play this, instead of having that like boring, just no movement animation, now we've got a lot more movement inside of our scene before he throws the plate. So what we might want to do is we might want to set this so that the noise doesn't start until like keyframe 15. So we can just jump back in here and just switch this for all of these. And actually we're probably okay with all of them except the Z, because the Z is the one that's making it kind of go through the ground, right? I don't really care if it's got a little bit of XY movement, but the Z makes it go through the ground. Now we've got a lot of fun noise to this animation inside of our scene. And I do think that I probably would want to knock the scale of that down a little bit. So it's probably a little bit strong for the Z location. So we're just going to bring this down, maybe make the scale even bigger. And so if we take a look at our final result, we've got a lot more noise in our movement next to our character, which I'm pretty happy about. I think it adds a lot to the scene. All right, so in the future, what we can do is we can animate the camera as well as adding some braking to the plate with the rigid body system so that it actually breaks when it hits the wall. But I'd love to hear from you what you'd like to see in this series. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.